Felix, we're talking about my favorite topic when it comes to football, which is going to be coverages. We're not going to get too far into the weeds like we did last week with the run fits. We're going to talk a little bit more a philosophical shift, more kind of big picture things that are happening in the coverage universe in terms of how defenses are starting to really prepare for this offensive onslaught that we see on every single year. Look, this is an offensive game. You have to have a defensive counterpart to it. I know that fans would love, but there is a point of no return. I mean, I think we've seen this one in the NBA where, look, 100-point games are fun, right? I mean, I'll never forget taking Bo, my middle son, to his first basketball game. He could not wait until they got to 100 because that was such a huge number to him. That was amazing. Right. But I think where we've kind of moved even as fandom is like, look, no one wants to see 130 to 125 point basketball game. That's insane, right? There's no defense being played. I think we're kind of where there was a little bit of a shock value in 2024. People were like, where the hell did the offense go early in the season? I think offense has figured it out. It's so funny, like knee-jerk reaction. I even wrote an article like, where is the offense? It was just that, hey, everybody's playing a light box. Everybody's playing from too high. We need to start running the ball. It kind of defenses kind of counter-reacted again, another knee-jerk reaction. But 2025, I think, is really where we've seen that the maturation of the too high revolution that we had in 2020, we're finally there heading into 2026. I think you have to have play coverages a certain way, and the teams that are doing that are being successful.
Right, and I think we've seen Vic Fangio be, and we've talked about this on numerous occasions, be the godfather of what this has really looked like. And you've also seen guys like a Mike Zimmer, essentially why he got fired in Minnesota, and then essentially aside from like the 15 minutes he had in Dallas because Jerry Jones was like, "You want a Super Bowl with the Cowboys?"
You can add Eberflus into
this. And there you go. So and it's interesting, like how Vic Fangio, like, has been in the league for a very long time, but is still in the league. And then a guy around his same age and some similar things about him is no longer in the league and wasn't hireable really towards the end of his career. So it's just really interesting to see how the NFL's really shifted things where, like, yeah, no, basically everybody's running a too high, and now we're really shifting towards where everything is more fluid and then more you can play football now, and fans respect that too.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's different flavors of doing this. You can even be Jim Schwartz and still survive playing really high rates of cover one. I think that probably a lot of people don't understand the team that ran the most man coverage last year was the Philadelphia Eagles. So, even in the Fangio with the actual real life Vic Fangio, when you have corners that can play cover one, especially in Cooper DeJean in your boundary corner and Quinion Mitchell, you're going to play cover one when you have that ability to do so, which leads me into what we're really talking today. A lot of people too probably don't realize 1989 is really when this defensive kind of revolution started, because the basis in the playbook for this started in the New Orleans Saints Mora system. And so from that, we get Dick LeBeau, Dom Capers. So we start
He's more than just the soundbite guys. He's more than just the play. He's more than that. He's a football coach.
For real. I mean, they're really the bedrock of that. Now, obviously, we have things intertwined in that, but it's so funny when you start breaking down the Fangio system. A lot of these old head NFL guys are like, you do realize that's just Dom Capers and Dick LeBeau. Like he's done that. What he's done that's completely different and that was brand new was to say, hey, we're just going to run everything from a too high shell. We're not going to give you anything pre or post snap, or really pre-snap, that tells you what we're going to run. It also is a counter to the offensive game that we play. It's about passing. I've said this multiple times. NFL owners are not paying the quarterback $50 to $60 million plus dollars a year to hand the ball off to a running back that's making like 8 or 9. That you're not going to do that. You're not paying receivers 30 to upwards of almost $40 million to, again, hand the ball off to a running back that's making 8 or 9 million. So that is really where the logistical part happens from it. And so we've gone from really a spot drop where, again, I'm just dropping to a spot. I'm playing with vision. I think the best quote of this is the Nick Saban quote about Dan Marino. Hey, spot drop works until you play Dan Marino, right? And that's the whole genesis in the 90s with him and Belichick of creating their now famous Ripley's match system, their cover 3 system that basically plays like man coverage, but it has rules built into it. It's just man. Match is just a fancy way of saying man with rules. And so spot drop, again, just like we have today, the quarterback play is so much better than it ever has. I know that everybody always argues that it's terrible, but I would argue that even at the lower levels, I was at a conference in Iowa a couple weeks ago. I talked to a coach from Omaha of all places. They've had more Division I quarterbacks come out of Omaha in the last 5 years than they had in the previous like 15 to 20.
Well, and I kind of want to ask the question of like everybody says like play every sport, which yes, play every sport when you're in high school because you're probably not going to be an NFL quarterback, so do that. But also if you are on that track of like, I mean, an Arch Manning, obviously he was going to be a quarterback and things were going to work out. But if you're an Elite 11 guy on that track to be that guy, does it behoove you to be like, yeah, I got to get a quarterback coach and kind of focus in? And therefore quarterbacking has gotten better at the high school level and college level, and it looks a little different on the NFL level, but it's just different from what we've seen from like Dan Marino and Tom Brady, different from what obviously the way they play quarterback just because the position evolves, but from what we're seeing with the way coverages are changing, that's why it looks a little bit different.
At the lower levels, though, you see much more of what we would call like man heavy, right? We're going to play on ball. We're going to press. We're going to get up in you. You have more space. And the easiest way to do that is to lock it down. Mm-hmm. But at the NFL level, you don't have that much space. Everything is played in the middle of the field. Everything is constrained. Now, what you get is still these intermediate crossing routes. You're not getting a lot of isolation ball that you see at the college level. The other day, there was a clip of I think it was a Memphis offensive coordinator who comes from the Heupel tree. If you know anything about Josh Heupel in Tennessee, that is the Art Briles system that's where I started my coaching system. So one of the things about them is that they're going to make you declare. So if they with that width, they're going to make you declare. They're going to make you declare whether it's a nickel blitz. They're going to make you declare whether it's cover 3. You're going to have to show what you're going to do. So I think with offenses at the NFL level, and one thing that I think we will start seeing this year is in order to get those isolations, you're going to have to spread it out.
And then we're just back to where we started.
All right. So you can see, and that's kind of the hilarity. That's kind of the hilarity of football is just that, and why it's always interesting is that we're constantly cycling back and forth. Is that I think offenses understand like, hey, if we get in 12 and 13 personnel, that's going to force defenses to get into cover 3 that isolates. Well, what happens when you have a defense that just sits in a cover 2 shell and you can't get them to bring the ball, you bring those players down? Now, I don't have the isolation. We get what happened in the Super Bowl where Drake Mays is like, forget it. I'll just throw it as deep as I can, ends up getting picked because there is no room deep because and so that's really where we are defensively is can you live in nickel? Can you survive the run in nickel? And if you can, you're probably going to end up winning more games than you lose just because of the way that the game is flipped. So that's really what we're kind of talking today is really about kind of where we are structurally in the NFL, kind of even within the college landscape. Because we had a vision drop system, which is basically we're going to play kind of zone match system, win a national title in Indiana. And so where we haven't seen a Saban system coach win in a couple of years where we have this, extra man heavy, a lot of tags into it. I think people are trying to simplify because I think where we've gotten to is that if you're going to have a ton of rules, it's a more or less built like an if-then system. Well, if offenses know your if-then system, then they're going to get you into those situations so that they can create a predictable outcome. And so I think that's kind of where we are in this kind of football landscape.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder as we kind of pivot and look towards the draft and like it is obviously, and they're for various different reasons. Nick Saban guys wouldn't work in the NFL for one reason or another, and then like a lot of the DBs would, but some of the linebackers wouldn't. But now that we're seeing like the national championship coaches are coming from non-Saban guys, like you just said, what type of players are coming into the NFL? Like, am I missing something? And like, yeah, why wasn't Dylan Moses awesome? Because of he should have been athletically, everything seemed like it was there, but what was it? Football sense that just didn't get it, that just didn't work out. And like now that we're seeing more and more linebackers focusing on coverage and then all these different things with the way that DBs are set up, are we getting players that are just different and are at least being taught different?
Yeah, and I look, the Saban system is, you can't knock it. It's got
Right. It works.
100. It's like got hundreds of thousands of national championships, right? Like, everybody in that SEC landscape is trying to do it. I think the problem that you're going to run into now at the lower levels is just that you can't keep these guys for 4 years.
Right.
Right. So even your redshirt juniors that, are early enrollee guys, look, redshirt junior, man, they're a senior. They've been there for 4 years. Like this is their fourth season. I think you're starting to see even in that system a paring down of kind of what they've had some schematic bloat over the years of just like we run so many things. I think the common denominator really in everything, it's going to be the execution of what you're running, but also do you have answers built in? One of those is kind of, since you're playing everything from a too high shell, how can we have different sets of rules to the field and to the boundary? How can we hybridize these coverages? I think what's an interesting shift that we've seen in the NFL landscape has been that, the nickel is really important, but also that boundary corner. And it goes back to what your question was, is what are we getting player wise?
Mm-hmm.
This might be one of the deepest safety drafts that we've seen in a long time. Now, safety is still,
and like a couple years ago, this was that position that's like, are we going to pay them? And like it was the same thing with running backs and linebackers. And these are all guys that like, and hybrid guys and that fit and everything else in between. But like, it's interesting. Like we talk about the pendulum shift every week, every 2 seconds on this pod. But it is true that like we're seeing like 5 or 6 safeties that are legitimate, maybe first to second round picks and could be day one, week one contributors.
well, I say it all the time. We get every year there's going to be a kid that's drafted in the second round, going to be an all pro. And we're like, what? How did we miss this? And it's like, well, he was one of the best safeties. I think the whole deal with Dillon Thieneman, who is a freakish athlete, proved that he could play the post safety at Purdue, proved that he could be a hybrid and even a box safety at Oregon. He has the whole gambit, right? He can play anywhere in that back end, especially nickel and then either one of the hash safeties. But we're still arguing like, oh my gosh, is 12 too high to the Dallas Cowboys? Oh, I couldn't believe, spending that much on him. And it's like you start realizing a guy like Kyle Hamilton went like in the teens, right? I think people now look at like a Devin Witherspoon of like, well, he's a nickel and he got drafted in the top 5. That's not great, right? But here's the thing. I mean, I thought Christian Parker, who got hired here in Dallas, said it best. It's like it's a first round position now, and if you can play it, then you're gonna be in a lot better position defensively if you have a guy there, and Nick Emanwuri, who now he goes in the second round. Well, do you think that the Seahawks would probably still take him if it was the top 10 pick? Now, hindsight's always 2020. So I think let's first off, before we get any further, let's break down some positions so that people understand. First off, what is the big deal about a boundary corner? The boundary corner is your best corner. That's where the isolation is. As much as we have motions and shifts and we have 3x1s and 2x2s, let's be honest. A lot of times, even if you put a tight end into the boundary or the short side of the field, he's usually going to move. He's going to block. It's still an isolation play. You're still trying to isolate the corner on the backside. That's why you're starting to see, I think, too, the big argument against traveling corners. This comes up every single year. Only the best corners travel. Well, Pat Surtain came out, I think it was this year, in a podcast, was talking about it's kind of a misnomer because if I travel with a guy, they're going to realize that, and then they're going to get them off the ball, and they're going to move them. And then then what we're doing now is for one guy to track this one guy, all 10 now have to adjust to my movement every time that we move. So if we're in a zone, I have to know, where am I now in the zone? If it's either number 3 receiver, number 2 receiver, what is a stack check? What's our bunch check? All of these things go into it. Then if it's man coverage, yeah, that's simple. We just line up and you travel with him. But you understand that this is a zone dominant sport now. We're we're playing zone on almost 70%. So now what I can do is where the isolation is, I'm going to put my best corner. And then the field corner tends to be more of a kind of either a space player. He's really good in space. He's longer. He doesn't necessarily, maybe he doesn't have the man skills that can get up on the ball and press. I think the best example of this in the NFL last year was like J.C. Horn versus Mike Jackson. I don't think most people would say, who's Mike Jackson, right? But that was one of the best corner tandems in the NFL if you weren't paying attention. They also played zone on almost like, about 75% of their plays. Horn played into the boundary. He's one of the highest paid cornerbacks in the league. Mike Jackson has been kind of a journeyman career NFL guy, but he is one of the best off-ball zone corners. So you have your field and you have your boundary. And then that kind of that key cog there is the nickel, which what last offseason we were talking about, they were all getting paid. So I think we're starting to find out that that boundary corner, that boundary safety, because he's your other apex defender opposite the nickel, and then obviously your nickel. Those 3 positions in the secondary are super important, and if you have 3 of them, you're probably going to be one of the better defenses.
Well, and I think even just from the math problem of you have 8 guys in a defensive backfield, at least looking at the quarterback's eyes, and then you also have your 4 rushers about to sack him. And so like it is just like it's kind of like that stereotypical scene in the jungle where it's just like eyes looking at you, just kind of peeking at you through the darkness. But that's really what it is of like, and then as soon as he lets go, he starts his throwing motion, boom, wherever it's going, that's where everybody else is going. And so like it seems really obvious. Again, we're going down to the basics, but like, how many eyes do you want on the quarterback? As many as I can.
Yeah, and so here's kind of the caveat to it, and we don't want and Jalen Ramsey when I think this is like the first time the Rams were on Hard Knocks, he's talking to a young guy. He's like, "Hey, if you're watching the quarterback, you're watching him get completions." Yes, so that's where this hybridizing comes into is I think corner plays a little bit differently. You have to play a little bit more with man, whereas everybody else is packing that interior and really kind of eliminating the space on the inside. The Seahawks were a great example this year of a team that had a very high open rate. And this is why you have to be careful when you look at data. So if I look at open rate, how many times was a receiver who caught the ball, there was nobody within like 3 yards of them or whatever, right? Okay. Yeah, so they had a high open rate, but their average depth of target and then also their kind of yards after catch was like one of the best. So how can you do that? You play a lot of zone and you match the receivers and where you are. So they may be open, but you're also compressing the field and you're forcing these really low throws, which goes back to what we started with, this too high revolution. And what we're seeing right now is started getting to see this. Adam Archuleta, who does TV for CBS, kind of hit me up one time. Was like, "Hey, I don't think this is quarters." And I was like, "Oh, okay, explain this to me. How do you not?" Then he goes, "I'm really telling you, I think that they're using the backside safety as with a quarters tool, but it's more of a vision concept." So I start really digging into it. The Patriots are playing it this way. The 49ers are playing it this way. You can start seeing it's an extension of kind of that poach safety or that backstop safety, that robber safety that you use on the backside. And so it starts just coming up in a lot of different things. It goes back to, again, how do you isolate the single receiver? Well, if I know that guy's a vision safety, I'm going to find some way to grab him. That's why you need to still have that bounded corner. And that's really where the cat and mouse game is. So the weak side vision mechanics, I just did a clinic on it on Match Quarters. it marries with the 2 high shell. You can run all of your cover 3 stuff out of it. You can run your quarter stuff out of it. You're even if for guys like in the Fangio system, they're cover 8 and cover 6. Basically, they're cover 2 rotational stuff. So cover 6, quarter, half. I think we all cover 8 is just they call it the inverse of it. The Ravens guys, they call it tricks, which is the Fangio term for the poach safety. So not to get too into the weeds of all of this, but what you can now start doing is creating steals, backstops, certain robbers, and that goes into that split field mechanic. So what we've really seen is it's the same thing that we went through about a decade ago with the fronts. Remember it used to be, oh, we're a 4-3 or, oh, we're a 3-4. And then I think any more defensive coordinators are like, it's really about the spacing. Right, which we just talked about last week. Are the B gaps closed, or is there a B gap, bubble? So to me, coverages have kind of shifted in the same way of where even in cover 3 or even in split field coverage, we're going to find ways to kind of share tools, right? So if I run split field coverage, the big thing is the middle of the field's wide open. Okay, but I'm going to teach my post safety or my high safeties to close off that post depending on the release of 2 or depending on the coverage structure that we're running. A lot of times the Fangio system guys, it's really hard to tell whether they're in cover 3 or they're in their 8 or 6, just because the way it overlaps and it creates these nice overlappings. And then you're playing match. But sometimes we're playing match to one side, we're playing zone to another. It's hard to tell, like, hey, where's the man side? Where's the zone side? And I think at the end of the day, you mentioned it. Zone eyes are going to get you the ball, right? If I can see the ball, I'm going to get the ball. Man coverage a lot of times is the easiest thing to do, and it's great, but I'm getting PBUs and PIs, right? I'm batting balls, and I'm getting pass interference calls. I'm not getting a lot of the picks. Sometimes you can get a tip drill, but I'm not getting a lot of the interceptions that a lot of these zone systems have, and that's kind of where we are. We're seeing cover 3 structures have a man side and a zone side. We're seeing, or hey, I've got quarters tools in cover 3 with the weak vision safety playing high. Cover 2, we saw this with the Bills. They're playing 2-man to one side and they're playing regular cover 2 to the other. So that's really where we are, is hybridizing everything.
Well, I want to stick with the Bills for a second because they have a new coaching staff, but new defensive coordinator coming in, Jim Leonard. And obviously you watch the Broncos the most because as a fan and as a football fan, with how good their defense has been over the last couple of years, how does he kind of morph and adapt what he's doing there? And like what kind of problems, especially if you don't have a guy like Pat Surtain? Like, I mean, and again, we're talking about all these systems, but sometimes it's just like, yeah, if I have a defensive player of the year on my roster, it just makes the 5 things I want to do most that much easier. So how does he kind of morph and transform? And the Bills have already had good defense, and they have the previous head coach had a great system and all that good stuff. But how do those 2 things kind of marry together with, like, these are what the guys know, but here's what I want to do, but I don't have what I used to.
Well, I think he's going to have to go through the same thing that the Bears went through with Dennis Allen. And Dennis Allen wants to run a lot of cover 1 with cover 2. Well, he has the best cover 3 defense in the NFL. So let's play cover 3. Let's play more match 3. When they played match 3, they were one of the best the secondaries in all of football. He's going to have to kind of do the same. Now, the nice thing that he's going to bring, Leonard is going to bring to the Bills, is that he already runs kind of a hybrid cover 3 system that he wants to match really heavily to the passing strength and then kind of play zone away. This is why, if you were wondering, why did Taron Johnson get kind of jettisoned out of the Bills? I thought he was one. Now he's had some injury issues, but he's one of the better nickels. Well, he's a zone nickel. He's not a man. He's not a man match nickel like Jaquan McMillan, right? That's another player. Like, guys are like, well, he's not that great against the run. He's not. It's like that's not what he's asked to do. They're playing 5-man fronts. They don't need the 180-pound nickel in there, kind of careening in there as a missile. It's kind of the same logic that you saw with the Patriots this year with Marcus Jones, right? They're going to use their safeties, Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson, who, by the way, I think Craig Woodson's going to be near the box a ton more this year. They're going to use that guy instead of using the nickel. So I think they're going to be fine. You're going to see a lot less cover 2. You're going to see a lot less quarter structures. You're going to see more cover 3. But even within that system, he's got a man side and a zone side. And I think that that's really where we're at. It's the evolution really of kind of football. There are still some teams that don't want to run from a 2-high shell on a majority of snaps, but I think we're starting to find, and defense coordinators are starting to find at the NFL level, especially, that really, if we play from a 2-high, we sacrifice a little in the box, but the offense really has to hunt for the isolation deep shot. And then also, we just have created so many better layering concepts within the interior play. So like crossing routes, mesh, over the ball throws, all of these things that kind of the modern offense runs off of. It's really, really hard to throw. And we're just now forcing everything low into the flat.
Right. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of the show, because you look back at like that 02 Buccaneers team, that Tampa 2, and I mean, even dating further back, because Tony Dungy in the 90s, let's not forget how good of a coach he was before Peyton Manning came along in his life. But nonetheless, Monty Kiffin ran the defense. So let's talk about how great Monty Kiffin was. At any rate, it is interesting to see how defense has transitioned. And like, I mean, again, that 02 Buccaneers team, you got John Lynch. You got Derek Brooks. You got Warren Sapp. You got 3 Hall of Famers. And none of them were the Super Bowl MVP, I might add. But it is really interesting that, like, great system and all. You needed those guys to really make things work out for you. But explain to me how some teams have kind of evolved beyond that.
Yeah, so the first thing is, what's the difference between cover 2 and the difference between Tampa 2? And Tampa 2 is really a derivative of cover 3. If you draw it up on a board, it looks just like cover 3, but you have 2 cloud corners, meaning both your corners are going to be sitting in the flat. You're going to have somebody running through the middle of the field. Typically, it's going to be a Mike backer. He has to be quick. He has to be vertical. You have to find help. Cover 2 is inherently open in the post. So how do you do that? You have to match verticals on the inside. So this is where your nickel has to carry the vertical over and back. This is one of the main problems that you find when teams kind of reverse engineer the Bills, or they're trying to reverse engineer the Fangio system, is that they completely forget that your nickel cannot just fall off at 12 to 15 yards unless he's got a poach player on the backside. If he's got a tricks player and 3 runs some sort of short route, 2 goes vertical over and back, there's a backstop for that. In 2x2 sets, that's why a lot of times I think, the NFL used to just be a 3x1. Everybody was trying to get in a 3x1 to get you in your trips check, figure out where you were going to drop your safety, and then here's the matchup I want. Now, because everybody's playing from a 2-high shell, what they've done is they've leveraged the 3x1 really, really well. So we're starting to see more 2x2, because they at least know if I get in 2x2, that trick safety or that intermediate backstop may not be there. There's a way that I can manipulate it or get rid of it, which again, what our defense is doing, vision safety with the weak side, keep static, sit right there. And so the cover 2 is the Mike is not running through the middle. So what we're going to do is either overlap with the safeties, or we're going to have to keep that nickel on number 2, and he's going to carry. You have to have some sort of a match principle that turns into a man match at some point. All man match means is that once that receiver has determined his route and our rules tell me I have him, then I have him through the down. I might be able to deliver him to somebody, but I have him through the down. That's man match. Zone match means I'm going to match him through my zone, but at some point I'm going to stop and I'm going to fall off. You typically see that in a lot of quarter structures, right? Because you've capped out any kind of vertical with the 4 DBs that you have on the backside. So you have to have, and you mentioned it, Tampa 2 requires elite athletes at very particular situations. And really, Tampa isn't dead. It just changed into something different. And because we're now starting to see a bunch of different shell disguises, a lot of teams now are putting that deep post safety as the pole runner, and they're just putting them right in the middle of the field. And then they're getting into their Tampa rotations in other places, but that guy isn't moving. And so that's really where we're starting to see. And then also the Fangioification of the NFL, where we now have our cover 2 rotations which is your 6 and 8, which is we're rotating the quarter side to get the backstop or the cover 2 side to get the zone double.
That's just awesome. Vic Fangio, just like, you know what? If I can't be a good head coach, just gonna put my fingerprint everywhere on defense.
It really is. And I know people get worn out about it and they don't like to hear about it, but it really is. I mean, you could argue Spagnuolo with the palms pressures, kind of starting that. If Fangio with the rotational coverages, I think, the other thing, Robert Saleh doesn't get enough credit for it, but even when he was with Shanahan, and this is really the genesis of where a lot of these vision safeties come from, especially on the weak side, marrying cover 3 with quarters and then playing a high dose of cover 1, is we want everything to look like everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want quarters to look like cover 3. I want cover 3 to look like quarters. If we run man covers and we run man coverage, that's fine. Very rarely do you get a team like the Texans where it's just like, look, we lined up in this. You know what it is. We're just going to kick your ass and it doesn't really matter. Like, that's rare. And at some point, DeMeco Ryans is going to have to build in tools because you either have injuries or those guys move on and move out, right? I don't think people give Saleh enough credit last year for what he was able to do with the defense. Once Bosa left, they had no pass rush at all. So you kind of have to play from more of a basic scheme. How do you mitigate a lot of those issues? That's the other thing, because the opposite or the counter to that is the Bengals. The Bengals said, we're just going to 5-man pressure everybody. We're on cover 1. Right. So it really depends on what you've got, but man, run what your players can run at the end of the day.
Right. And another interesting thing here, Fangio adjacent schemes can flip quarter, half coverage, and that's where the evolution of that piece of coverage has come from. And so it is just real. Again, Vic Fangio is just like, all right, everywhere. And like, again, I think that like Steve Spagnuolo, I think he's got the most Super Bowls as a coordinator, and like some guys have been like trying to get him into the Hall of Fame. But I think Vic Fangio might have had a bigger imprint on defense because of things like this, because everybody's running his defense kind of like Kyle Shanahan with on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and just like with that system, if you don't really know the why behind it, it's going to be very difficult for you to implement this into it. I think one of the teams this offseason that's going to get a lot of love is Indiana, and people are going to watch Indiana, the stunting, the different fronts, the vision mechanics on the back end. Look, the one thing that I think that everybody could pull from them is their coverage concepts. They ran every version of cover 3 because they played it more of a zone style. And so it was basically just putting X's on a whiteboard. I'm creating leverage. I think you get into trouble when you try and do a bunch of, they stunt every play. I'm going to stunt every play. No, it's not what they're doing, it's how they're doing it, when they're doing it, and then what they are doing versus certain looks and certain things. That's more important. But you see this with the Fangio system. I mean, look, I go back to the Bengals. Al Golden trying to do a bunch of coverage skies, trying to run some Fangio schemes, like trying to do a bunch of different stuff. And it was like, your secondary can't do it. You're doing the exact thing that Lou Anarumo got fired for. Remember, you and I both were like, the hell are the Bengals doing firing Lou Anarumo? Well, it was like they look, and that again, people in the building tend to know what's in the building. Well, to their point was, hey, we got a bunch of guys that don't really understand what's going on. We're doing too much. Let's hire Al Golden to run, cover 1 on every play. He doesn't. He tries to do the Fangio system. And it's like about week 4, they're like, okay, fine, forget it. Let's just run a bunch of cover 1. Demetrius Knight doesn't know where to drop. What if we just start blitzing him? And then, it's poof, we become a much better defense, which, again, poor Joe Burrow. Wish you could find that out in week 1, not find that out in week 10. But I digress. That's the problem with the Bengals. Now, I think here's the other thing. Quarters gets a lot of talk. But it's actually kind of waned, and it was very quick. Quickly everybody started running quarters, and then quickly everybody said, this is a coverage tool, not a coverage that we want to kind of base out of. I think the solid structure guys love quarters. There are a few guys that want to run quarters, but they do it for completely different reasons in the NFL than they do at the college level. And I think we've started to see that is that it goes back to what we're talking about, the hybridization of coverages. People aren't just running traditional cover 6. They're not just running traditional Tampa 2. They're not running cover 3 with a pre-snap shell of, hey, you know exactly that we're in cover 3 and where the safety is going to be post-snap. So what you've seen is at the lower levels is you get, hey, we run quarters because of 9-man spacing, right? I can get 9 guys to the box really, really fast. This is why it's also called blitz coverage. Right?
Mhm.
You're basically in cover 0. Look, if you get 4 verticals or they have some sort of play action, you're right. It is basically going to be blitz coverage. That's why it's called 4 lock. It's basically cover 0, right? It also gives you leverage for the quarterback player. If I play cover 1 at the high school level and they're running zone read and that quarterback pulls it, the guy in the middle of the field is the only person for that quarterback. And so when I run quarters, I now have a half man on either side. It fits me better. Well, we don't necessarily have to worry about that. Really, at the college level, there's a few teams that are still running a lot of zone read. At the NFL level, we're getting more like quarterback counters, quarterback powers, right? We're not getting the zone read element of it. And so I think what quarters has really become is a way to poach, so to steal the number 3 receiver, or a way to create a robber concept to either cut a dig, to cut a crosser. These are cutoff valves. And so what we've done now and at the lower level, so at college bracket on the slot, everything's kind of shifted to the slot. I think we're going to shift back more to the number 1 receiver because I think defenses have gotten really good at just clogging the middle of the field. And so now there's more isolation. So I've always learned, that it's better to try and find things like if you're gonna base in one particular thing, you need to have some sort of a marriage on the other side. So if we're gonna run bracket, we run weak rotation cover 3 rip blitz, right? It's just easy that way. If we're gonna be quarters, I'm probably just gonna play cover 1. Quarters is basically man with rules. I just need to manufacture a way to close the post. Everybody else is just playing man. We can get over that really quickly. What we're seeing now is really that, the mudding of the reads in cover 3. So we have weak rotation cover 3. We have quarters. Quarters is inherently weak. Why do I say that? What did I just say at the very beginning of the show? Your boundary safety is really important because he's your other apex player to your nickel. He's down more than he is back. Your nickel sets the passing strength. Weak rotation away from the passing strength. Who is that? That's your boundary safety. So using him as a vision player and just muddying the reads. And here's the other thing. Think of it like RPO wise. If a quarterback's running an RPO and the nickel doesn't move, he's handing the ball off. Well, if the quarterback's eyes go to the weak side safety and he doesn't move, he's going somewhere else. Or he's going to panic. He's going to hold the ball and be like, why is that guy not moving? Why is that guy not moving? I have no idea what the coverage is. I don't know where to go. What am I going to do? Yep, either hit or I'm just going to throw it.
That was way too many thoughts right there. That was way too many.
Exactly. Or I'm going to run or I'm going to throw it to the flat route, my release route. So I think like that's kind of where we've got is you have to create dynamic coverages. You have to find ways to marry things. That's where we are. That's why I said at the beginning, this is a full maturation of the Fangio system. Is that you can't just be one or the other. You have to make these things all look the same. How do you do this? You modularize it, interchangeable parts. You build systems on top of each other, and everything marries together. So it's complex for the quarterback, but it's easy for your players to execute.
Well, and I think that's why I think a lot of defensive coaches, and I've said this for a while, where like offensive coaches love time to like kind of create their plays. They love like the long halftime at the Super Bowl while Beyonce's up there performing so they can drop a play and for the second half. While defensive coaches, they like the momentum where like they don't really love the timeout where it's just like, we need to keep going. We just got him off a really great play or whatever that looks like. And so it's just kind of like restoring that chaos of it. And it's just kind of really interesting to see like, how can you seal off half of the field? And you've used this word a few times, but kind of maneuver it and kind of fake it a little bit while just saying, all right, we've got our best players taken care of this other part of the field. And like, yeah, you may have a great receiver. Our corner is just as good, or our safety can figure out the whole entire situation or whatever the case may be. And you're really putting not only you do need the Jimmies and Joes, but you're putting the trust in those players of like, yeah, no, you're a part of this. And I think that even on the macro level kind of like makes it even more as an ex-player, like just makes you more part of the system and just makes you have more ownership over it all because you're making decisions, but there are also rules in place of doing this, that, and the third.
Yeah, it's guardrails. I put
Yes.
guardrails in to help you, and then I'm going to funnel the ball to a very predictable area or a low percentage area on the outside and deep, right? And that's really where quarters and split field coverage is coming from. Everybody says, oh, the middle of the field's open. If you teach your safeties correctly, or if you leverage, like we've seen with this 6-8 stuff with Fangio, the weak rotation stuff with in cover 3 with the quarters rules, if you do it the right way, it's really hard to you're basically packing the middle. The best example of this, and I hate to bring this up, but I'm going to because it's the Chiefs, is the Eagles quarters pivot in the Super Bowl versus the Chiefs. There was nothing in the middle of the field. There was 4 or 5 guys. I mean, they were able to shove everything over to the front side. All their 3x1 stuffs they couldn't get. Kelsey had 3 guys around him at all time. So what were they able to get late? It's just vertical shot, just throw it up. Hopefully, Xavier Worthy just runs by 2 guys. But that's a low percentage throw, and you're just not going to get a lot of those, right? We've seen that picked off more than we've seen that actually work at the NFL level. All right, let's pivot. We are getting really close to the draft, so let's wrap this show up here pretty soon. Let's talk about so I went through it kind of I went to I think it's like drafting the mocks or whatever, grading the mocks or whatever. Kind of who are the consensus top 5 safeties? Because that's really what we're talking about here is the evolution of the safety position. That's really what this is. Corners have always been corners. A boundary corner, I can point a boundary corner out from 1980 the same way I can point a boundary corner out in 2026. That guy can cover. Let's pick him. He's fast. He can run. He can cover.
He kind of looks like a basketball player and acts like one too.
Exactly. Right. So let's talk. So the number 1 guy on here is Caleb Downs. I think a lot of people are going to, what is he going to be? Is he, and again, it's that argument of, are you really going to draft a nickel in the top 10? Or do you think that he can play deep? I think that this is a kid that can play a lot of different positions. And really, the 3 kids that we're going to talk about here at the beginning are all kind of going to have to go through this evolution. I think a team is going to have to decide, do we play him down or do we play him back? The teams that have him playing down they're probably going to come. They don't see him on the board early with the teams because you're just not going to pick a nickel in the top 10. I think teams that see him as a hash safety that can play a bunch of different toolsy things, I think those are the teams that are going to go. But this is a kid that has pro level IQ already. He worked under Patricia. He played under Knowles, who does a bunch of different things. He's capable of playing in the box. He can blitz. He can do everything. My question with him is where is he going to play? And I think some GMs, if they go and they talk to their coaches, it's like, if we bring him on here, what are you going to do with him? If you don't have a plan, it's going to be really difficult for him to land in that top 10.
Right. That's what's really interesting when you have there have been multiple guys like an Isaiah Simmons and just put them anywhere. Well, then there's nowhere to put them.
Yeah, well, and those guys tend to be really big. I think even Worry last year, I think people were just afraid because we've seen this time and time again. We get these beautiful safeties that are 220 pounds and they can run and they look good. And then you kind of get in with the magnifying glass. And you're like, yeah, but their hips are stiff and they can't really cover. Simmons to me was a no. When he came out, people were like, oh, he's going to change the game. I'm like, he's really a blitzer. If you looked at what Venables used him for, he put him in the middle of the field. He was a robber, and he was a blitzer. He was a Sam linebacker. And I really feel bad for the kid because, again, he was probably too early. If he came out now, I think everybody's like, yep, Nick even worry him, and we can figure this out. He can guard a tight end. He can play near the box. He can blitz. He's a great pass rusher. Look, Caleb Downs is not that. Caleb Downs is not 220 pounds. Caleb Downs is 200 pounds. He's a safety. I think he can play front or back. I want him to go to a situation where they need that third safety to run big nickel, and then he can be more. I think he's going to be a lot like Brian Branch, where he plays deep in base and he plays your nickel. when you guys play nickel, like kind of the way that the Lions initially wanted to use him. I think him and Hamilton, that's the way that he gets used.
All right. Between McNeil Warren and Thieneman and Halsey and Ramsey, because I mean I think it's Downs and then everybody else. Who do you think is going to have? And obviously this is a little bit more projection, but also like day one, who can have that contributing? Because I mean you're looking for a safety in the first or second round. You're looking for a guy that can play for you week one, and be really really good for you week one. Which one out of these that we have listed here could be that?
I think it's Thieneman. I think it's Thieneman, and number 2, I think is going to be Halsey. And the only reason why I think Halsey is perfectly made, somebody's going to be like, that's going to be, especially, I think he's going to go early in the second, and he's going to be our guy where we look back a year later and it's like, well, why didn't he go in the first? And it's like, you overthought it. I think. And now I will say this: McNeil Warren played in a quarters-based system. He played a bunch of different techniques. Played a robber safety. He's going to definitely be your down safety. I think Thieneman is probably the best overall in terms of the non-Caleb Downs, of where he can play deep, he can play back, he can play nickel. He's kind of like a 3-position player. And then Kamari Ramsey played for D'Anton Lynn, so don't forget he played it in NFL style. He had an NFL coach. He can play a bunch of different things. So I look. This is a deep safety class, and that's why I wanted to make sure we hit on them before we got out of here.
Yeah. Finding entropy. That's Cody's big word of the week. Entropy.
Yeah, entropy's really been a word that I kind of picked up this year, and kind of looking at it. I started messing around with some data at the beginning of the NFL year, talking about entropy. Entropy just means diversity, right? It just kind of is like, where are we at? And you go and you look at who are the most successful teams. If you can find everything kind of looks the same and you run everything and every down as a quarters flip, the offensive coordinator is now guessing. And I think that's really what it is. They know your rules. So you have to find ways, whether at whatever level you are, you have to find some sort of a change up. Now, you don't get me wrong. You want to base in something. You want to have a base. You want to have your feet solid in the ground, just like the old coaching cliche. You got to have a solid foundation. You don't want to build your foundation on sand, right? You want to build it on rock. You got to have a nice foundation before you build that massive mansion. You don't want to just build it.
Get on the line,
right? And now get on the line and touch the line, right? Like you have to have that, but you also have to understand that the people opposite you are going to know your rules. And I think the better program that you're at, you have to ask yourselves, okay, the teams that we're going to face, maybe it is in the 3rd or 4th round, or maybe it's in that first round of the playoffs. We know we're going to play this team. We know that we can win our division. You need to start preparing and having changeups and then putting them on film, because you want to make sure when you get into those situations, your kids have already run it. They understand it. They understand the changeup, and you're using the changeup on a constant basis. Because look, we've all done this. You get into a playbook, you want to start running something, and then all of a sudden you totally forget that it's there because, this is my, special thing that I'm going to run. And then you get to that and you totally forget it. And then your kids don't know it because you never ran it. So, run it, have a change up.
It will take time to restore chaos. That's a George Bush quote. So it will take time. It's a real thing he said.
Yes, I'll take time to restore chaos. And that's that's what we're talking about. Defense, it's coming back. They're restoring the chaos. I love it. My final thought on this: smart teams don't call coverages. They have rules that respond to the offensive movement. And so that's really what you need. And you mentioned it. Let your kids have ownership in this. The best teams allow their players to have ownership. The way to do that is to have guardrails. It's not necessarily it's always or never. We want to stay away from those terms when we coach.